The House of Atreus. If you want to understand just how deeply a curse can sink its roots into a bloodline, start here, at the very beginning of recorded Western dysfunction, with a king who murdered his own son and served him to the gods as a dinner course. Tantalus, king of Mycenae, slaughtered his son Pelops, boiled him, and presented the flesh at a divine banquet. The gods immediately recognized what they were eating and refused, reassembling Pelops from the pot, though Demeter, distracted by grief, had already eaten part of his shoulder. So the gods replaced it with carved ivory. That image alone, a boy rebuilt from a cooking pot with a gleaming white shoulder, tells you what kind of family this is. Pelops went on to win his wife Hippodamia through a chariot race, but he won it by bribing the king's charioteer Myrtilus to sabotage the wheels, then threw Myrtilus into the sea to avoid paying him. And Myrtilus cursed the family with his dying breath. 2 generations of divine punishment stacked before the dynasty even properly begins. Pelops' sons, Atreus and Thyestes, then launched into a feud so savage it became the template for fraternal hatred for the next 3,000 years. Thyestes seduced Atreus' wife and stole a magical golden lamb that was the symbol of Mycenaean kingship. Atreus retaliated with something worse. He invited Thyestes to a reconciliation banquet, killed Thyestes' young sons, cooked them, and served them to their own father before revealing the children's hands and feet at the end of the meal as proof of what he had just consumed. Thyestes fled, cursing the entire line of Atreus to destruction. That curse landed with precision. Atreus' son, Agamemnon, commander of the Greek forces at Troy, sacrificed his own daughter Iphigenia to the goddess Artemis to get favorable winds for the fleet, a decision his wife Clytemnestra never forgave. When Agamemnon returned from 10 years at Troy, bringing the Trojan princess Cassandra as a war prize, Clytemnestra murdered him in his bath, the greatest king in Greece, killed by his own wife in his own home, with an axe. Their son Orestes then killed Clytemnestra to avenge his father, which unleashed the Furies' ancient divine spirits of vengeance, specifically activated by the killing of blood relatives who pursued him across Greece, until Athens itself had to convene the first jury trial in history just to stop the supernatural punishment cycle. 5 generations: cannibalism, child sacrifice, spousal murder, matricide, and divine persecution. The House of Atreus did not have a curse so much as it had a tradition. The Ptolemaic dynasty. Most dynasties collapse from external pressure invasion, economic failure, military defeat. The Ptolemies were different. They were perfectly capable of destroying themselves from the inside with almost no outside help, and they did it for 275 years with extraordinary consistency. Founded by one of Alexander the Great's generals after Alexander died without a clear heir in 323 BCE, the Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt as a Greek-speaking monarchy that adopted Egyptian religious traditions for legitimacy while keeping Greek culture for themselves. The policy that defined them most was marriage. Specifically, they married each other. Brother married sister, uncle married niece, cousins married cousins. This was justified through Egyptian religious tradition. Pharaohs were divine, and divinity should not be diluted by commoner blood, but the practical result was a family tree that looked less like a tree and more like a knot. Ptolemy VIII, known to his own subjects as Physcon, meaning potbelly, is a useful illustration of where this led. He ruled Egypt twice, in between being driven out by his own sister wife Cleopatra II, whom he had previously tried to murder. When he returned to power with the help of his niece wife Cleopatra III, yes, he had married his sister and his niece, he wanted to send Cleopatra II a message. He killed the son he shared with her, dismembered the body, packed the pieces into a chest, and had it delivered to her as a birthday present. This was not a regime with a few dark episodes. This was a regime in which that story does not even rank as the most disturbing event. The famous Cleopatra VII, the last one, the one who actually spoke Egyptian and conducted simultaneous affairs with both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, inherited a dynasty already half destroyed by its own internal violence. When Rome closed in and Antony's forces collapsed, both she and Antony died by suicide within days of each other in 30 BCE. The Ptolemies did not fall, they simply ran out of family to kill. The Julio-Claudian dynasty. Rome's first imperial dynasty lasted 96 years, produced 5 emperors, and managed to make every single one of them either a murderer, a victim, or both. Augustus, who built the dynasty, spent his reign watching his carefully chosen heirs die one after another, his nephew Marcellus, his grandsons Gaius and Lucius with contemporaries, noting that his wife Livia had a suspicious habit of outliving everyone who stood between her son, Tiberius, and the throne. Tiberius himself, once emperor, retreated to the island of Capri and governed Rome through terror and informers while engaging in private behavior that the historian Suetonius documented in detail lurid enough that translators in the Victorian era left sections, Latin, Then came Caligula, who ruled for less than 4 years, but packed enough catastrophe into them to last a generation. He may have suffered severe brain damage from an illness shortly after taking power, and what followed was a reign of executions, sexual violence, theatrical cruelty, and possibly the most famous act of deliberate political absurdism in ancient history, reportedly appointing his horse, Incitatus, to the consulship. Claudius came next, the family's designated fool kept alive, precisely because nobody considered him a threat and actually governed reasonably competently before being poisoned with mushrooms in 54 CE, almost certainly by his own wife Agrippina the Younger, so that her son Nero could take the throne. Nero thanked her by having her executed 6 years later. He then kicked his pregnant wife Poppaea to death during an argument, performed on stage in Greece as a singer and actor while the empire frayed, and died in 68 CE, fleeing his own military, reportedly weeping and declaring, "What an artist dies with me," as he arranged his own death. 5 emperors. Not one of them died peacefully in bed, having passed power smoothly to a chosen successor. The Julio-Claudians did not merely have a bad run, they industrialized dysfunction and called it governance. The House of Plantagenet. The Plantagenets ruled England from 1154 to 1485, which is long enough that you might expect a few stable reigns in there. You would be wrong about the proportion. The dynasty opened with Henry II, whose knights murdered the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket, on the floor of the cathedral in 1170, reportedly triggered by Henry saying, in frustration, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" Henry spent years afterward doing public penance, walking barefoot through Canterbury while monks flogged him. Henry also faced open rebellion from his own sons, coordinated with the active encouragement of their mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, whom Henry eventually imprisoned for 16 years to stop her from organizing them. His sons still rebelled. His son John, who came to power in 1199, lost nearly all English territory in France within 5 years, was excommunicated by the Pope, and was then forced by his own barons to sign Magna Carta in 1215 at effective sword point, after which he immediately had it annulled, which triggered a French invasion of England. John died the following year of dysentery during a military campaign, reportedly having just lost the crown jewels in a tidal estuary crossing. Edward II was deposed by his own wife Isabella and her lover Mortimer in 1326 and almost certainly murdered in Berkeley Castle the following year. Richard II was starved to death in captivity after his cousin Henry IV took the throne. Richard III, in the dynasty's final act, allegedly had his 2 young nephews, the princes in the Tower, aged 12 and 9, murdered to secure his own claim, a crime that has generated scholarly argument for 500 years. The dynasty ended through the Wars of the Roses, roughly 30 years of civil war between the Lancastrian and Yorkist branches of the same family. The Plantagenets' last major achievement was destroying themselves. The House of Valois. The Valois ruled France from 1328 to 1589, a period bookended by the 100 Years' War on one end and the French Wars of Religion on the other, which gives you a reasonable sense of the general atmosphere. The most extraordinary individual in the dynasty's history may be Charles VI, who developed severe and progressive mental illness in his 20s. He experienced episodes in which he failed to recognize his wife or children, believed he was made of glass, and would shatter if anyone touched him, and ran screaming through palace corridors in states of complete dissociation. During these episodes, which could last for months, France was effectively ungoverned, and the resulting power vacuum allowed English forces and rival French factions to tear the country apart. His successor, Henry II, managed to end the 100 Years' War and consolidate the kingdom, then died in 1559 from injuries sustained in a jousting tournament, when a lance fragment punched through his visor, entered his eye socket, and drove into his brain. He lingered in agony for 10 days before dying. His widow, Catherine de' Medici, then spent the next 30 years maneuvering her sons onto the throne in sequence Francis II, Charles IX, Henry III, each reigned progressively more unstable than the last. Charles IX, under Catherine's influence, authorized the assassination of Protestant Huguenot leaders during the Street Bartholomew's Day Massacre in August 1572, a targeted killing that immediately spiraled beyond anyone's control into nationwide massacres, leaving somewhere between 5,000 and 30,000 dead across France. Henry III, the last Valois king, was stabbed in the abdomen by a Dominican friar named Jacques Clément, who had requested a private audience and concealed a knife in his robe. Henry III died the following morning, reportedly naming the Protestant Henry of Navarre as his successor with his last coherent words, thus ending a Catholic dynasty by bequeathing France to a Protestant. The House of Habsburg. If the Valois destroyed themselves through violence and bad luck, the Spanish Habsburgs managed something rarer. They destroyed themselves through mathematics. The Habsburg policy of intermarriage within the royal family, cousins marrying cousins, uncles marrying nieces, the same bloodlines looping back through each other generation after generation, was a deliberate strategy to keep power consolidated and alliances tight. A 2019 study published in Scientific Reports analyzed 11 generations of Habsburg genealogy and calculated that Charles II of Spain had an inbreeding coefficient of approximately 0.254, higher than the expected coefficient of a child born to two siblings. He was, in measurable genetic terms, more inbred than if his parents had been brother and sister. The physical consequences were visible and documented. The Habsburg jaw, mandibular prognathism so severe that Charles II could not bring his upper and lower teeth together, making it nearly impossible to chew food properly or speak clearly. Chronic illness throughout his short life, and complete infertility, meaning the most powerful dynasty in European history ended because its last Spanish representative could not produce an heir. He died in 1700 at 38 years old, and his death triggered the War of Spanish Succession. But Charles II is not even the Habsburg dynasty's most individually tragic figure. That distinction arguably belongs to Juana, later called Juana the Mad, who may have been suffering genuine mental illness or may have been a politically inconvenient queen who was labeled mad and imprisoned for it. What is not disputed is that she was locked in the castle of Tordesillas in 1509 by her own father, and remained there until her death in 1555, 46 years of confinement, while her son Charles I ruled in her name without apparent urgency about her condition. The House of Romanov. The Romanovs ruled Russia for 304 years, from 1613 to 1918, across a country so vast that the journey from one end to the other takes 7 time zones, and they managed to be catastrophic at a scale proportional to the territory. Peter the Great, who modernized Russia, built St. Petersburg on a swamp, using forced labor that killed tens of thousands, and tortured and imprisoned his own son Alexei in the Peter and Paul fortress in 1718, with Alexei dying there. A century later, Tsar Paul I was so spectacularly hated by the Russian nobility that a group of officers entered his bedroom in St. Petersburg's Mikhailovsky Castle on the night of the 23rd of March 1801, and strangled him, with his son Alexander reportedly aware that a coup was being planned and choosing not to stop it. But the dynasty's most operatically cursed chapter belongs to its final generation. Nicholas II inherited an empire already straining under industrialization, inequality, and military decline, ignored repeated warnings that reform was necessary, led Russia into a catastrophic war with Japan in 1904-05, and then into the First World War in 1914, and watched the entire structure collapse into revolution. Threading through the final years is Grigory Rasputin, a Siberian mystic peasant with no formal religious training, who had attached himself to the royal family because he appeared able to alleviate the suffering of the hemophiliac Tsarevich Alexei through means that remain unexplained. Alexandra trusted him absolutely. Nicholas trusted Alexandra. Rasputin effectively influenced state appointments and policy during the war years, which the nobility found intolerable. In December 1916, a group of nobles killed him in what became one of history's most embellished murders, poisoned, shot, beaten, and drowned, according to various accounts. On the 17th of July 1918, in a basement in Yekaterinburg, the entire immediate Romanov family, Nicholas, Alexandra, their 4 daughters and their sick 13-year-old son Alexei were shot by Bolshevik forces. 304 years of imperial rule ended in a basement. The House of Windsor. Britain's current royal family has been the House of Windsor only since the 17th of July, 1917, when George V changed the family name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, the actual German dynastic name, because Britain was in the middle of fighting Germany. The name change is the dynasty's founding act, and it sets the tone perfectly. Image management as survival strategy. Edward VIII took the throne in January 1936 and abdicated in December of the same year, less than 12 months, to marry Wallis Simpson, an American woman who had been divorced twice. Edward and Wallis spent the war years in the Bahamas, where he had been appointed governor partly to keep him at a safe distance, under documented suspicion of Nazi sympathies following his 1937 visit to Germany, during which he met Adolf Hitler. Prince Philip's sisters all married German princes, several with documented Nazi affiliations, and were excluded from the 1947 royal wedding. Princess Diana's marriage to Prince Charles, announced as a fairy tale in 1981, had collapsed visibly and completely by the early 1990s, with documented eating disorders, reported suicide attempts, affairs confirmed on both sides, and a BBC Panorama interview in November 1995, watched by 23 million people in Britain, in which Diana described the marriage's failure with a precision that made comfortable denial impossible. She died in a Paris car tunnel on the 31st of August 1997, being pursued by paparazzi at speed. Prince Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein, Virginia Giuffre's allegations of sexual abuse, and his 2019 BBC Newsnight interview led to his removal from royal duties. Prince Harry and Meghan's 2021 interview with Oprah Winfrey included allegations of racism within the institution regarding their son's skin color. The House of Windsor's defining skill is survival through a combination of silence, slow adaptation, and the sheer weight of institutional inertia. The Joseon Dynasty, the curse of Prince Sado. Korea's Joseon Dynasty ruled for over 500 years, from 1392 to 1897, and the Joseon delivered an episode of internal horror so specific and so well documented that it has never stopped reverberating through Korean history and culture. Prince Sado was the crown prince, heir to King Yeongjo, and by his mid-20s he had developed severe mental illness. The behavioral record documented by those around him describes violent episodes in which he killed palace servants, court women, and members of his household, sometimes apparently without clear motive. The political situation this created for his father was, by the standards of dynastic governance, genuinely impossible. Executing a crown prince openly would have required formal justification, created a succession crisis, and potentially delegitimized the throne itself. Leaving him alive meant a mentally ill, violent man would eventually become king. Yeongjo's solution, carried out in the summer of 1762, was to order his son into a wooden rice chest, the kind used to store grain and seal it. Sado died inside it 8 days later, in the summer heat of the palace grounds, while his father and the court waited. He was 27 years old. The witness to all of this, and the person who documented it in extraordinary detail, was Sado's wife, Lady Haegyong, who wrote about the events across decades in a memoir called The Hanjungnak, completing it around 1805. It is one of the only first-person accounts written by a woman from inside a royal family in pre-modern Korean history. Sado's son became King Jeongjo, widely regarded as one of the most accomplished rulers in Korean history, who spent much of his reign attempting to rehabilitate his father's memory. The House of Grimaldi. The House of Grimaldi has ruled Monaco since 1297, making it the oldest ruling dynasty in the world still in power. And it operates under a curse that, at this point, has 700 years of supporting evidence. According to tradition, the curse originated with the dynasty's founding moment itself. François Grimaldi disguised himself as a Franciscan monk to infiltrate and capture the fortress of Monaco in 1297, and a local woman cursed the family in response, decreeing that no Grimaldi would ever find true happiness in marriage. Whether you believe in curses or not, the track record across 7 centuries is statistically remarkable. Prince Rainier III married Grace Kelly in 1956, one of the most famous actresses in Hollywood, in a ceremony so widely covered that it was broadcast to 30 million television viewers across Europe. Grace Kelly died on the 14th of September, 1982, when her car went off a cliff road above Monaco, the same stretch of road she had driven in Alfred Hitchcock's film To Catch a Thief almost 30 years earlier. Her daughter Stephanie was in the car and survived. The investigation found that Grace had suffered a stroke before losing control, but the location, the timing, and the circumstances ensured that the story attached itself immediately to the Grimaldi curse narrative. Princess Caroline's romantic history includes a first husband who died in a speedboat accident in 1990, a second marriage that ended in public scandal, and a third husband whose public behavior generated enough tabloid coverage across Europe to constitute a subplot of its own. Princess Stephanie's marriages and relationships played out almost entirely in public, including a marriage to her own bodyguard. Prince Albert II acknowledged 2 children from different relationships before his 2011 marriage to Charlene Whitstock, a former South African Olympic swimmer, who then spent most of 2021 inches South Africa being treated for a serious infection following a procedure, unable to return to Monaco for nearly a year, a situation that prompted sustained international speculation. Monaco covers 2.02 square kilometers, roughly the size of Central Park in New York City. In a country that small, there is nowhere to hide, and the cracks have been appearing, faithfully, for 700 years. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.